Hello folks, welcome back to another Cleveland Aeromotive. I figured I would dedicate an entire video alone to density altitude. And you've seen me post this in every performance related video that I do. But still, based on some of the comments on my Rentec versus AMG video, and I want to thank those people that do comment, that do like, and do subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate that. And if you haven't done that already, please subscribe. But some of the comments that are being left clearly illustrate to me that a lot of you don't really understand what density altitude is and the palpable effect it can have on a heat engine's performance. So some of the comments that were left were like, wow, that's a slow 63. Even the old 525 to 530 horsepower 63 with rear wheel drive should do low 12s at 115 to 116 miles per hour. Also comments like, not even stock numbers. Or comments like, what the hell is a tuned 550 doing 13s quarter mile? Well, if you look at the video, I never did slower than a 12.6. So I don't know where the 13's coming from, but this all clearly illustrates to me that some of you don't understand density altitude. So this is your chance as car drivers to get caught up on density altitude. We're going to discuss density altitude in this video, and then I'm going to show you an easy DIY how to calculate your own density altitude instead of downloading and paying monthly subscriptions for a silly app. All that when we return.
Positive climb, you're up.
Hi, I'm Stefan, a 747 pilot here in the USA. With this channel, I'll be applying my technical knowledge to another passion of mine, automotives and the culture that surrounds it. For the next few minutes,
30,
sit down,
20,
settle in,
10,
and hang on. Our next stop is Cleveland Aeromotive. All right, we're going to open up this section of the video with a couple of definitions. Let's first define density altitude. Density altitude is pressure altitude modified for non-standard temperature. So you have to ask yourself, well, what is a standard temperature? Standard temperature is set at 15 degrees Celsius or 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, another word that was used in there is pressure altitude. So what is pressure altitude? Well, pressure altitude is defined as vertical distance above, and I'm going to add below, and you'll see why in the charts. So vertical distance above or below the standard datum. And what is a standard datum? It sounds kind of archaic, right? Well, standard datum, they're referring to pressure datum. And the standard pressure datum, when measured in millibars or inches of mercury, is 29.902. So we have those two sets of standards set here, 15 degrees Celsius and 29.902 millibars. All right, let's take a look a little bit at some theory of how temperature affects density altitude. First of all, we're going to take a cube of air, a volume of air, and we're going to set that volume of air at 15 degrees Celsius, standard temperature. Now, if we have a predetermined amount of oxygen molecules inside of that volume of air at 15 degrees Celsius, what happens to that volume of air and the oxygen molecules as we warm them up? Well, just like with anything, if you warm them up, like engines, they start to spread out. It starts to get bigger, right? So what's going to happen is you're going to lose a predetermined amount of oxygen molecules that was originally inside of that volume of air. Now several of them are existing, yet they're still now existing outside of that volume of air. All right, so you might say, well, okay, well, I have a supercharger or a turbocharger attached to my, my car, or a couple of them now, right? And that can suck in all this air and essentially negate the effects of a high density altitude. Well, you know, in theory, if you had a turbocharger that was big enough, but let's take a look, for example, at the P-38 Lightning. The P-38 Lightning had turbochargers on it, at least the US version of it did. When the British got their non-turbocharged version of the P-38 Lightning, they complained and they said that they'd been ripped off during World War II and that it was the castrated P-38 Lightning. So even with turbochargers on it, the P-38 Lightning achieved a service ceiling of 44,000 feet. Now, the service ceiling is when your ability to climb more than 50 feet per minute ends. So even with turbochargers, density altitude was out turbocharging the the P-58 Lightning. And even the Rentec guys said that when we looked at my performance chart, that this is where you're running out of turbo.
Limitations of factory turbos, and we can see here at the top we're just out of turbo.
A little bit farther up, maybe around 5,000 RPM, right? And that was a high density altitude day. So theoretically, if you had big enough turbochargers the size of a house, you could climb to the ionosphere. But we all know that's practically impossible. All right, I figured the best way to illustrate what could be seen as small performance differences is to give big examples. So what I did is I took advantage of the fact that I work at an airline and I had them generate from my dispatch department 2 different sets of numbers. And these are takeoff performance numbers. And those numbers I asked be identical in every single way. The fuel load on the aircraft, the payload on the aircraft, and the weather as well, except one difference. And that one difference would be the temperature. One set of data was run at 15 degrees Celsius, the other at 35 degrees Celsius. Now, I am going to be speaking to you in aviationese, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a couple things here that'll help you understand this a lot better. So I'm going to be talking about accelerate, stop, distance, and smurgeon. So in order to understand what an accelerate, stop, distance is, we have to first understand what V1 is. And V1 is the maximum speed at which you can reject a takeoff. So you can reject a takeoff after V1, but your probability of winding up in what's called EMAS at the end of the runway, or even winding up in the dirt, are very, very high. So when we're flying airline transport category aircraft, we always calculate a V1 to let you know if you lose an engine after V1, you're going to take off regardless of the fact that you've lost an engine or not. Before V1, you can start braking. So if we start doing a rejected takeoff right before V1 or right at V1 theoretically, we're going to wind up with something called an accelerate stop distance, and it explains itself. It's the amount of distance it takes to accelerate to V1 and then using all of the accoutrement on the airplane like reverse thrusters and speed brakes and RTO braking, which is automatic braking, and it's the best performance that you can get on an aircraft, even better than if a human being did it themselves. So we are going to be using all those in order to calculate our accelerate stop distance. And what is told to us on the data is a data point called smurgeon, or stop margin. That is the amount of distance that is still remaining between the front tire of the aircraft and the threshold at the opposite end of the runway. So let's take a look at how those numbers changed. All right, let's take a look at these 2 different sets of data here. As you can see, I've got the performance data both in with 35 degrees Celsius and with 15 degrees Celsius. I'm going to hide the stop margins for now so that we can go over and verify that these are identical performance data figures until we get to our stop margin. But here, I guess they were inspired by my video that I sent them of the Rentec versus AMG video, and they are using Sarasota-Bradenton runway 14. There is 8,350 feet of usable runway for that runway. Both sets of data show calm winds. However, this is where you'll see, but you can kind of barely see that. I'll see if I can highlight that with some graphics. 15 degrees Celsius set and a 35 degrees Celsius set. The QNH is our altimeter setting. It's 29902. And our weights are identical from the takeoff gross weight to fuel on board, 0 fuel weight. That's not a number that you need to be concerned with, but they will be flaps 20 takeoffs. Now, you can already start to see here that there are some performance differences. We discussed V1, right? The highest speed at which you can perform a rejected takeoff. You can see that the V1 for 1 is 144, and for the 35 degree ones, it is a 143. But, all right, let's unveil those smurgeon or stop margins. All right, you can see that with 15 degrees Celsius, we have a 682 foot stop margin or distance remaining at the end of the runway, whereas with a 35 degrees Celsius, we only have 203 feet of stop margin remaining. So what's the difference? The difference is 479 feet. Now, in the grander scale of an entire runway, that might not seem like much. However, that is more than two 747s nose to tail in distance. So we've got a 747 that is 200, 747-400. The 8 is a little bit longer, the latest and newest version of the 747. But 747-400 is 232 feet long. We can fit two of those into 479 feet. Now, I know that the comparison might not be 100% mathematically correct, but imagine this. If we're able to outperform a 747 by two complete 747 lengths, actually more, can you imagine the advantage you'd have if your lane was being run at 15 degrees Celsius and your competitor's lane was being run at 35 degrees Celsius? And let's say, to scale it down a little bit, if everything happened the right way, the same reaction times and the same launches, you would be assured that you could beat your competition in the same car by more than two lengths. Now you can see how density altitude really has a dramatic impact, because on the quarter mile, that's a big loss for the person that ran their lane at 35 degrees Celsius. That is a decisive win. So now you can see how density altitude really impacts heat engines and why I guess the automotive world is going to electric now. Although, God, how humiliating. So anyway, now what I'm going to do in the next section of this video is I've been told and I've seen on various videos that an app is available that you can download. I don't know if you have to pay a monthly subscription to it. It seems to me that that's the way apps are going these days. But I'm going to show you in the next section of the video how, through printing out a single piece of paper and just knowing the airport code of the nearest airport that you are doing your competition at, and being able to find temperature and pressure data that you can just DIY. First off, download and print out a good copy of a density altitude chart you can take with you to the track. I put a link to a really good one in the description. Next, we're going to go to Google for a couple of answers. First, type in the nearest airport to the venue or neighborhood, followed by the phrase ICAO code. If you're in the lower 48 of the United States, this code should always start with a K. In Northern Europe, your code will start with E, South America S, Canada C, and Alaska and Hawaii P for Pacific. In this example, we're going to use Dallas-Fort Worth. For this exercise, however, we're going to use Denver International, or KDEN. We'll also need to know field elevation. When we Google that term, it shows Denver International lies at 5,431 feet. Write that down. Now, we want to know our current weather. We'll use a free product called a METAR. A METAR is published by almost every airport in the United States, large or small. It's refreshed at least every hour, around 5 minutes to the top of the hour. Armed with our airport code, we'll go to www.aviationweather.gov. From the Google results on your smartphone, you can either click on METAR and TAF data, or if you've already navigated to the splash page of the website, scroll down until you see Station Data. Either way, just input your ICAO airport code and hit go. You'll instantly get the current METAR report. As I discussed in the lead up to this section, the two numbers we're interested in are the temperature and the barometric pressure in millibars. They're both easy to spot in the code. Look for the slash. The number on the left of the slash is your temperature. Now, look for a sequence of characters starting with A. This stands for altimeter. That's our barometric pressure. Our temperature here is 33 degrees Celsius and our pressure is 30.08. Now let's go to the chart. First thing we're going to do is go to the right side of the chart and see how our 30.08 barometric pressure affects our pressure altitude. Here it shows if we need to add or subtract from the field elevation. Remember how I added the words or below to the definition of pressure altitude? If we use 30.08, we can see this falls between 30.00 and 30.10. We're not launching rockets here, so let's just grab the closest one. Well, in this situation, we actually needed to subtract 165 feet since this places us vertically below the standard datum. Let's subtract that off the field elevation and use that number, 5,266 feet, on the left side of the chart. Let's enter the left side of the chart from the bottom. Our temperature is 33. That's just to the right of 32. Draw a line straight up until you hit an imagined diagonal line corresponding to approximately 5,266 feet. Follow it over to the left and that is your density altitude, approximately 8,400 feet. Wow! What would happen, however, if we were in Denver during the winter? Let's say the temperature is 10 degrees Celsius and the barometric pressure 29.95. First, we add 10 feet to the field elevation, making 5,441 feet. Enter the left side of the chart at 10 degrees Celsius. Go straight up till we hit an imagined diagonal line just south of the midway point between 5,000 and 6,000 feet pressure altitude. And now go straight over to the left, 6,000 feet, a full 2,400 feet below the hot day we calculated earlier. I'd rather be racing a car that performs like it's at 6,000 feet than a car that performs like it's at 8,400 feet, wouldn't you? All right, that wraps up this complete driver's guide to density altitude. Even if you already knew a little bit about density altitude coming into this, I do hope I was able to show you some things that you didn't already know. And while you're out there, always keep in mind, putting safety first does not mean you have to have a boring drive experience.